I just want to hear the final answer. I'm sorry. I'm really trying to understand because this is about my head. Quite frankly, I know what I do. And it's just a yes and no answer that I want to hear. Can I be at the negotiation that will happen before it goes to the 3 meetings that you have mentioned?
I can tell you what you can do is you can always come to my office and get me here by staff and talk to you about it. If Mr. Stoll would like to come to that meeting and I invite him, he comes, then yes, he can be there for the meeting.
No, but it's not a negotiation. They're just asking me to be as an FYI candidate. I want to be when they're sitting down so I can hear how it's going to affect what I'm planning to do there. But that is going to affect me directly.
What you would hear is the two of us discussing what we as staff are going to be recommending in the case, and me bouncing ideas off of him.
Yeah, I'd like to be there. I'll be happy to stay and make the time, learn, and understand.
Okay, well then I would actually contact Marina or Heather when we set the meeting. I'll ask Mr. Stoll to actually come. Okay.
Thank you. Just a yes.
Other questions?
During the negotiation.
We negotiate. I will negotiate in my office.
Jerry, would I be able to be there? I live next to this property, so does Sada. Would we be able to attend that kind of meeting as well? And Mrs. Roberts who lives there?
Yeah, me too.
I mean, you know,
You guys,
I'm asking a question. I'd like to finish it. We live next door too. We utilize that. And so why would you be willing to meet with this?
She's been polite to me on multiple occasions. We don't know.
When have I not been polite to you, sir? Other than today? And your attorney can make you stop, but you're on this agenda to give a presentation. You are coming into our community, taking a space that we use for our community and have used for decades. And you can walk around here with your money and build, like you're gonna build on East 12th and Waller.
You're talking about the affordable housing.
Okay,
The
you guys,
affordable houses,
you guys,
the
I asked
$100,000
that
condos that you
I
build.
asked
And
that
you
we
can
keep
treat
this
all these
meeting
folks
quiet and
the way that you treat me.
And
You can see how far that's gonna get you, Austin style.
You guys,
It's not gonna get you very far.
this is
Okay?
my
We
meeting.
will run you out of this community.
This is
in a
my
heartbeat.
meeting.
Okay? You wanna be disrespected.
Are there
You're gonna
other questions?
feel it like you are right now.
Does
Okay?
anybody
I
have
don't
any
wanna
other
hear any
questions?
more from this guy.
for Ms.
Yeah, Jerry, I just want to harp on
We're
this
not welcome in our community.
this historic context business because
And I wanna make it super clear.
Excuse me, I cannot hear your friend.
you talked about, and when it was mentioned earlier about Mr. Griffin here talking about moving the school building over to the currently existing city right-of-way, and you sort of appear to be giving a semi-technical discussion about architectural integrity and engineering integrity and how in historic preservation it's usually considered to be optimal to leave a place where it is.
My understanding, yes.
And that is true. I can tell you, as somebody who's been a historic preservation consultant and professor for 20 plus years, that's true. But you're being very choosy and selective, okay? And you dodged the question about historic context more generally. You've heard some of the people here give you hints about what the actual historic context of that property is. Now, I hate to use that word property. It's a traditional cultural place, but I digress, okay? You can't pick and choose when it's convenient for you to only talk about the building and leave out the fact that it's part of a cultural landscape, because it's a double standard when you do it here, and then over at Muni, you basically fall on your knees and say, oh my God, it's the greatest thing in civil rights ever. There is a historic preservation double standard here, and we have a standard that you're refusing to apply. I told you earlier what it was. And at the Historic Landmark Commission, Commissioner Myers and others are starting to employ the cultural landscape standard. Why do you continue to fetishize buildings and ignore other things that under both our local preservation ordinance and federal law are eligible for historic status? Archaeological sites and cultural landscapes. Why do you do that, Jerry?
Fred, I don't think I've finished anything. I think that if you have the right to express your opinion to the Historic Landmark Commission about how much of the property you think should be zoned historic, I'm just telling you what my historic preservation officer has told me, that our #1 goal is preserving the structure. If you feel that more of the property...
It's not my feeling. It's a standard, a professional standard. It's not about my feelings, Jerry. I have qualifications that exceed your historic preservation officer. You're not talking to just a guy who lives here, you're talking about a guy who's written the book about the neighborhood. So please address me at my intellectual level and answer the question.
It is our job to offer our professional opinion to the commission. You as a citizen can offer your opinion to the commission.
As an expert witness, perhaps in court, Mr. Rustoven.
My name is Sara Zabaleta, and I'm an MSSW student at UT Austin. I recently conducted a community analysis project on the 78741 zip code. And one of the things that my classmates and I found is that gentrification is definitely one of the biggest threats facing this community, as other community members have also voiced. As a resident also, we have identified that it is so crucial to involve the voices of the community in any process that happens in the city. And I think that we can look to East Austin and see the mass displacement of people that have happened over the years from a lack of the city lacking that involvement from the community members. I think that this is an opportune time for us to learn from those mistakes and try to incorporate as much as possible the voices of our community members. We are here today telling you that this land is historic, that this land is important, that it's not just a building. And I think that it's so important for you today to go to your office afterwards and voice this and include that in the decisions that your office makes.
I can tell you that's why we're here, to hear your opinion. That's why
For us to move forward and to actually have community involvement, it is important for community members to be able to sit in the negotiation meetings. As this person over here said, as this community member voiced earlier, it is important for us to know what's going to happen with the property, to have an input into what comes out of this. And so I, along with others, that I would love to hear, their opinions, would like to ask you what the process would be like to be involved in this negotiation.
I can tell you that on zoning cases, not always a negotiation. Sometimes somebody comes in and says, we're asking for this zoning, and then we as staff just say, no, or yes, or something in between, and there's not a lot of back and forth. You know what I mean? Sometimes that's kind of how the process works. People ask, we offer our professional opinion, right? That's why we're paid city staff, and then the city council decides. What's different about this case is this issue of, the school, the demolition permit, and the request. And so this case is a little bit different in that I have been going back and forth with Mr. Stoll, having encouragement to not use the demo permit. And so it has become, something of a negotiation. I have no problem telling y'all, where we land. I have no problem if Mr. Stoll agrees for us having, a meeting. You can hear us talk back and forth. It's not going to be very exciting stuff. It's going to be like square footage of buildings, percentage of impervious coverage, stuff like that. We're still trying to get there. We'll have to get there before we get the planning commission, obviously. But I have no problem having another meeting. But the negotiations, I say negotiations. It's negotiations in an attempt to get Mr. Stoll to agree with me, so that we can go to the commission together and say we're in agreement. We may not get there. That doesn't always happen. So when I say negotiation, it's not my job to come to an agreement with him, or for him to have to agree with me. If the city council makes this decision, so I may say this is our professional recommendation. You may disagree. The city council decides. Obviously, it's best for the city council. It's easier for them if both sides are in agreement. Both sides being the staff and the developer. But of course, there's an important third party there, and that's the community. It's not just the staff and the developer. The commission hears from all three, in the case goes for public hearings. So, I will still be discussing with him these details. We have work on the case. I have no problem sharing those with you people. I have no problem having another meeting where you can hear, what we've been discussing. Now, whether you guys are on the phone when we're discussing whether it should be making up a number, 65% impervious cover, 70% impervious cover. I can't promise you that I can have you there for every one of those conversations, you know what I mean? But, I do want you guys to feel a part of this process, you know what I mean? I think that this is an important enough issue that you guys be a part of it, that's why we're here today. I'm willing to have more meetings, if you guys would like to later. We are limited in time, I'm limited on my ability to mail out notices to as many people as we notify for this meeting. But, I want to include all of you all in the discussions, to let you know what decisions are made, but it's not like I make a deal with them and then it's a done deal. It's up to the city council to decide. The question is just whether he and I are in agreement when we go to city council or not. And I want to hear from you guys, as well as hearing from him, as well as hearing from my staff, in deciding what we are taking to the council.
So if I can explain, and if I can just explain for a second, I mean, what it is that, and I want to give you a little background. I'm born and raised here in Austin, Texas, East Austin. And what it is that we've been burned so many times. People have said so many things, and it's not just you. We've been burned by a lot of people. They say one thing and they do exactly the opposite. And do you understand, it's not the trust, this trust has been broken down for a while already. So it's not you, just please understand where the pain is coming from. No, I'm talking to
This is on your head.
Please understand where the pain is coming from. I mean, it's been years and years and years building, and the city of Austin should have known better. Honestly, they should have known better on this. They should have said, wait a minute, we already know what this means to the community. It's been expressed over and over. Books have been written. I have one of Mr. Fred McGee's books, and you should see it. It's amazing what this, it'll actually show you photos. Yeah, it's amazing. So I think what it is because they really need that trust. We need that trust already. I almost lost my grandparents' property. I lived in a car to save it. So I understand what it means. This is the spirit of what we're erasing. But the fact that you're even here listening is a big deal because most developers would not be doing what you're doing right here. They would just do it. They would just erase it. So we need to really think about that as well. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for even being in these seats. And I just want you to understand where the pain is coming from. It's not, we're just fed up with people lying. Yeah, we're just fed up with people lying to us already. And I think you've been put in a tough spot. Somebody allowed you buy that with some kind of, with another intention, but the fact that you're even willing to negotiate and talk with us is amazing to me. It's just, I think we need some way of them, we just want to kind of watch what's going on with this because
We need a number.
Angela, he said at the historic commission meeting that the only reason he was getting a demolition permit was so he would have leverage to negotiate with the community.
Yeah.
He had no intention of working
Keep
with
taking questions, guys. We're coming out.
It's on the record, Angela.
The weather's actually
I can show you.
changed since we started in here. It's actually raining outside now. So we're gonna go ahead and try and wrap this up. I'm gonna take several last questions. So, sir, hopefully you guys have a question yet.
Would it be possible for the city to acquire the property under eminent domain?
It would be.
Yes.
That's always
So if
a
there's a
possibility.
reason,
There are-
shown for the community to have this property as opposed to.
I'm not a lawyer. There's of course legal, limitations on what.
But you think it would be
the
possible?
property. But my understanding is, generally speaking, the city can get the property. Of course, that means, court battle usually. And that means, judge usually decides how much the city pays for it.
Unless it's poor black people, then you get to take it.
The owner was just shaking his head no. Do you have something to add to that?
I'm not an attorney, but I think it would be unlikely that there would be.
The city would have to prove it, public use and stuff like that.
Historic preservation
I'm
is a
not gonna-
public use.
I think it
I'm
could be
not a
proved.
lawyer,
I just
so-
wanted
As is
to-
giving back land that you
Good.
stole in
You have
87.
monetary impact. And I think,
Yeah,
I'm trying to see if there's anybody else for his time.
Could the city council put as a stipulation that they'll only sell the right of way if it becomes a community use? Could include like a learning center or something like that?
You guys are asking lawyer questions again. I believe, not being a lawyer, so caveat there, I think probably not. I think the city council can decide whether to do it or not. What the reasons are is probably in their head. But I do believe that the decision about whether to vacate the right of way or not, has to do with whether the city needs the property or not, you know what I mean? And then they're, like I said, they're obligated to pay.
What are you talking about? It's out there for
They're
30
obligated to
years.
pay a certain price to
All of
the
a
city.
sudden they wanna-
Whether the city can make that conditional upon something else or not, It's a worthy question. I doubt it, but I'm not sure.
And it seems like even, I mean, because it's a larger structure, if you had several different uses and at least like one or two of those uses was something that the community would
But
directly
through the zoning
be
case,
a part of.
through the zoning case, that's what zoning does, right? City decides, city council decides what you can use the property for. So, as a part of the zoning case, that is gonna be decisions they're gonna be making, is what can they use that building for? It is a part of the zoning case. It's gonna have to be-
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So when people buy property for land development use, it seems like they never look up what it was before, because it always it always happens like, oh, I didn't know it was this before.
Yeah.
I
I've heard that before, yeah.
Yes. That's just something I've noticed.
It happens, trust me. That and the realtor told me it was gonna be Greenbelt forever, that's the other one.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my name is Maya Gamble. I grew up in Montopolis, and I want to know what consideration your office and the planning commission put on the fact that in this city, we're losing our African American population, which is a disgrace. We're pushing our Mexican American population further and further out, which is also a disgrace. And moves like this make those things more likely. So what role does that come into play in your office when you're engaged in these negotiations and making these decisions?
First off, the planning commission hasn't made any decisions yet, and we haven't been before them yet.
I know that.
As to, I think, we think it is an important part of African American history in Austin, which is why we're recommending the historic zoning for the property.
But historic zoning for properties has not consistently historically preserved communities, and there's plenty of evidence for that all over the east side.
I understand that, sir.
So what you're saying
The
is
question
would answer
here
your question.
is, the question I think before the city council, the question the staff is considering right now, I've already told you what my answer is this building,
Not just the building, not just the building.
It's about the community.
is this building
community.
an important part of African American history in Austin? We think the answer is yes. We think the building should be preserved.
Re-ask the question correctly.
It's not just the
Not the
building,
question she's asking.
it's the space and where it is. Taking this building and putting it somewhere else doesn't protect what Austin was and needs to
I
hang
have
on
said
to.
earlier, we want the building to stay exactly the way it is.
But we're not asking you about the building, again.
There are two questions before us today.
There's a
What
question
uses
she
should be
just
allowed on
asked
the
you
property?
very clearly.
What
Why aren't
uses
you
should be
answering
allowed on
the
the property, and should the building be preserved? I believe I've tried to answer these questions.
Nice dodge. You should run for office.
I guess along those lines then, how does your office plan on preventing this type of situation from coming up again? Because if the issue that you're saying was that this was identified after the fact as a building of historical importance, because there was no assessment done around the city.
I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So one, we caught it. You know what I mean? Like when the demolition permit gets filed, it's our job to go out and research the history of the building and deciding what we're gonna recommend the landmark commission to do, right? Was there issues?
Gee, what's the track record there with black
And then
property?
the second part is something that we've recently completed in central East Austin, and we would like to do in other places, funding, availability, is a survey, a historic survey. We recently completed the East Austin Historic Survey.
Which doesn't include Montopolis or Dove Springs or Dell
Does not
Valley.
include Montopolis, that's correct, Brad.
Just want to make sure everybody's clear about that.
Okay. We want to do, I think if it did, he would have probably known about it when he bought the property. He would have looked at the survey.
You should have known in any case.
So.
Due diligence, that's what it's
we
called.
wanna do more historic surveys in more areas so that we can identify them. We're making a plug right now. You can make a pitch to the city council when they're making their budget decision, should be this September, about funding for those. We spent $300,000 doing the East Austin survey. I think it was 2 budget cycles ago. We asked for money last year, we did not get it. And this year is a tight budget year. But if the city council gives us more money, we use consultants. to do
$300,000 is
work.
probably about the same amount that he paid for the property.
No, it's less. It's less.
Well, I'm just telling you that I think that would be the best thing that we could do, is
not
do
right.
historic surveys to identify historic structures and historic districts, so we don't have to deal with them on a case-by-case basis with demolition permits.
What's his number?
Pre-identified.
Since we're talking, we finally have numbers here. What is his sales number? Because when we were at the commissioner's court,
That's
Well, let me ask you, Austin, you came to our contact team and said you were willing to sell. Apparently you've changed your mind. What's your number?
How much he's offering for.
Do you have a number, Austin, or are you going to just ignore the question?
Else who would like to ask a
Okay, Austin, I think I understand where you're at. You don't have a number. Okay. And you want to be part of this community? Good.
Fred, she's trying to ask a question first.
Is there any consideration given to the fact that preserving the building without preserving it as a community space doesn't seem to actually meet community needs or what the community wants? And that preserving the building with a little plaque, which points to the history but doesn't actually really acknowledge the history or the spirit of the place, the space, actually is insulting, actually feels insulting to the community. Is there any room for giving that consideration?
Yeah, I'm going to be considering that as we continue to discuss with him the uses for the building. You know, like I said, I think that we need to balance, he needs to balance economics. Economics is not my allocation. He needs to balance his, economic situation on the property. I need to balance what's in the city's best interest. As I said, my goal is to try to come to a mutual agreement with him in a way that, keeps the building and makes it work for him. So, have you answered the question?
Over the objections of a
I
neighbor.
haven't. You keep saying there's two things that we're here to accomplish. I think we've talked a lot about the building, and I want to briefly just, that your office can tackle, and the other one is the zoning and the uses of the property.
Yeah.
Is this map something your office actually produced?
Yes.
Okay, so it
That's
seems like.
That's a copy of the map from the Montopolis Neighborhood.
No, I know what it is. It's up there as well, but it seems like it was updated a week and a half ago. And so it seems like, in terms of the use of the property, like we already have a neighborhood plan.
We do have a neighborhood plan.
Right, and so why don't we just follow the neighborhood plan? The lot is zoned single family 3.
Yes.
We could use that use and still have plenty of space for a park, a community space, and that neighborhood. And so I would just like to get on the record that I think the neighborhood plan works in this situation and that we don't need to rezone the property. And I've also heard you say several times that you're concerned about the economic viability. And I'm not certain that that's the city's job to figure out how to sell them an easement that was stolen from the community and how to
Make it profitable.
and how to deal with the building that sounds like due diligence wasn't done or some dishonesty. So I understand how eminent domain works.
I agree with you. It's not my job
Yeah.
for him to make a return on his property.
Right,
It's
but
not my
you've
job.
said that several times, that you're concerned about
But-
the economic viability of the property.
But what I'm concerned about is the restoration and preservation of the building. And I think the reality of the situation is, because it is private property, in order for him to have a reason to restore it and preserve it, there, in the real world, probably needs to be an economic reason for him to do that.
What about the reason that the
So
community
that is
here
why-
saying we want it?
That is why.
Who made that determination that it needs to be restored?
That is not my job.
It's been like that for 50
to make sure
years.
that he makes money. It is not at all.
So as it's zoned now, how many units could he build on it?
Right now, the proposal is for 5.
How many could he build,
single-family
is that, it's zoned for 5?
Oh, how many is it zoned for? I don't know if we looked at that. I mean, with the right of way coming through the middle of it like that, I don't know what you could get on that, the tiny triangle there in the corner.
So why change it?
In other words, he needs the right of way.
I mean, it's not my job to design this.
No, it is you're giving him the right of way so he can make the money. In other words, his deal is dead without the city.
I think we're gonna do one last question, sir.
So,
Two questions.
are you aware of like?
Wait, can we hear her answer real quick?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's pretty easier. He asked the question, you will. How many could it be developed?
Without the structure on it, you could develop 11 single-family lots today, without change to the right of way.
So you lose the structure.
You would lose the structure.
Next, sir.
Okay, so, are you aware in the 1850s, as part of the preservation, whatever it is, that there were, 20 plantations still here, Peace Park, all those rich people that lived there were sitting on top of a plantation. There's actually slave houses still abandoned in the city that aren't noted, with any kind of markers, and they're just sitting in fields. There's on William Cannon, there's a fan house where they had 2 slaves to run their fans for their house. That's just sitting there in a field. Are you aware of these properties? And do Black and Brown lives matter in Austin?
My personal opinion, yes.
I'm asking the city's opinion, or your opinion, yeah.
I don't think in my position as a city official, yeah, I would say yes. But, you know, that's to me a larger question than what's up in my position. Yes. As far as the question about whether you think, or you're aware of properties that you think have historic significance that we may not be aware of, I would encourage you to call our office and speak to Steve Sadowski, the Historic Preservation Officer. As I say, he's in the hospital right now, hopefully be out on Friday. You know, we're always hearing from people, you know, to let us know, talk to us about things. And we do, you know, historic zoning cases, you know, from time. So, sorry to wrap it up, I said that was the last question, but I'll be available. I want to thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Appreciate you guys being polite, civil. And again, we have those dates. If you guys need me to give you those dates again, I'd be happy to do that. My phone number at the office, if y'all need it, is 512-974-3207. The information to contact Heather and Marie is in the packets that we handed out. Thanks for coming, guys.
Y'all are welcome to join us outside.